All right, let's dive right into this explainer on a really mind-bending fictional history called The Dawn Beyond Currency. It's a thought experiment that tackles one of the biggest what-ifs you can possibly imagine.
And I mean, really, take a second to think about that. Not just cheaper, not just affordable. What if everything was completely, totally free? Food, a place to live, energy, travel, even healthcare. What would actually happen to us, to our whole society, if the one problem that has defined all of human history, scarcity, just poof, vanished?
Now, this story isn't just about some perfect post-money utopia. No, it's way deeper than that. It's a look at the three huge transformations humanity goes through after money becomes obsolete. First, this incredible dawn of abundance. Second, an unexpected war over meaning. And finally, this really profound crisis of identity.
So first things first, how did this even happen? Well, according to this history, the revolution didn't start where you'd think, not in Silicon Valley, not on Wall Street. It all began in Africa with a series of technological breakthroughs that made the absolute essentials of life available to everyone.
First, they solved hunger. They deployed these autonomous, self-replicating machines called sunseeds. And get this, these tiny solar-powered robots would analyze the soil, plant the perfect crops for that specific spot, and even build their own irrigation systems. And the craziest part? They could replicate themselves using just sand and minerals. The result was absolutely staggering. The Sahara Desert started turning green in a matter of months. World hunger wasn't ended by politicians, it was ended by code.
Next up, transportation. A system called Umoja Rail, which means spirit or air, was built by swarms of autonomous bots. I mean, they could literally construct new rail lines overnight. This wasn't some slow, expensive government project. It was a living, adaptive network that just grew where it was needed. Suddenly, distance was meaningless, and travel was completely free for every single person. And then came maybe the most profound shift of all. They solved healthcare. These autonomous medical centers, the Ubuntu clinics, started popping up everywhere. We're talking AI and medical robots that could diagnose any illness in seconds and then 3D print the exact medicine you needed, right there on the spot. And because they didn't need money or insurance to operate, they spread like wildfire. This line from the story just perfectly captures the heart of this revolution. It wasn't just about cool tech. It was about taking back basic human rights from an economic system that had rationed them. But solving the problem of survival created a whole new set of problems nobody saw coming.
So with scarcity gone, you'd think humanity would finally find peace, right? Well, not exactly. Instead, they got a brand new kind of war. This wasn't a war for oil or land or resources, it was a war for the human spirit itself. A war over what it even means to be human, when there's nothing left to struggle for. The world basically fractured into two opposing camps. You had the open world, centered in Africa, which believed all this abundance technology should be open source, decentralized, and shared with everyone. And on the other side, you had the fortress nations, the remnants of the old world powers. They argued this new tech was way too dangerous to be uncontrolled. They believed that without a central authority, humanity would just dissolve into meaninglessness. It was a fundamental battle over the story humanity would tell itself about its own future.
The whole philosophy of the open world was built on this new infrastructure called the Q-commons. Okay, so when the story says quantum substrate, just think of it as the next evolution of the internet. A network so powerful and so fast that it could share not just data but complex ideas about human purpose, creativity, and meaning. It was like a decentralized internet for the soul. The fortress nations, of course, built the exact opposite. Q-shields. These were closed-off, militarized quantum grids. So basically, heavily controlled internets for entire countries designed to filter all information, monitor the emotional state of their citizens, and enforce a single state-approved version of reality and purpose.
So this is the key. The purpose war, as it was called, wasn't fought with bombs. It was fought with cyber attacks on narratives. They hacked culture. They weaponized misinformation to create existential dread. They tried to literally undermine the sense of self in enemy populations. It was a war over reality itself.
And this massive external war was perfectly mirrored by a deep internal crisis, because even in the peaceful open world, humanity was facing a terrifying new question. Once you've won the battle for survival, how do you win the battle for yourself?
For thousands of years, our identities were pretty much handed to us. They were defined by our jobs, by how much money we had, by the families we had to struggle to provide for. You take all of that away, and people were just lost. They were completely unmoored with no idea who they were supposed to be anymore.
This identity vacuum led people down some really dark roads, what the story calls the shadow paths. For example, some people became nulls, just emotionally flat, unable to feel any passion or purpose in a world where you could do anything. Others, the competitive revivalists, missed the struggle so much that they created secret underground competitions just to feel the thrill of winning and losing again. Then you had the identity purists, who clung desperately to old traditions, terrified of losing their heritage. And finally, the most extreme, the nihil architects, who decided that if everything is infinite, then nothing matters, and they actively tried to destroy meaning itself.
And this wasn't just a few people having a bad time. It was a global psychological pandemic. In the story, psychologists gave it a clinical name: Quantitative Identity Loss Syndrome, or QILS. Depression rates skyrocketed across the planet, not because of hardship, but because of its total absence. Humanity was literally getting lost in its own freedom. So, how did they fix it? How did humanity pull itself out of this nosedive? Well, this brings us to the final great transformation, the beginning of humanity's second era, an era defined not by what we needed to survive, but by who we chose to become.
They developed new mental and psychological tools to navigate this new world, and the most important one was the integration cycle. It became the fundamental rhythm of life. First, you'd go through a period of expansion. You'd explore everything, try new skills, follow new passions. But eventually, you'd hit saturation, that feeling of being totally overwhelmed by infinite choice. The next step was the most crucial: reflection. You deliberately retreat into quiet to process it all. And only after that could you reach integration, where a stable, authentic, meaningful sense of self could finally form. It wasn't a one-and-done thing. It was a lifelong practice of becoming.
And this is really the ultimate lesson of this whole story. For all of history, our identity was like a cage, defined for us by our job, our social class, our limitations. But in this new era, people finally understood that identity wasn't a cage at all. It was a horizon, something you're always moving toward, always creating, always defining for yourself.
And that brings it all back to a final, really powerful question for all of us. If you didn't have to worry about the rent, or your job, or just making ends meet, if all of that was just handled, who would you really, truly choose to be? What would you pour your life into? It's definitely something to think about. Thanks so much for joining me.